Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Shutter Island by Dennis Lehane, published in 2003. Here is my first edition copy. I should probably raise the camera or move this so it's in a better spot. There we go. So yeah, by Dennis Lehane, released in 2003, and then I am comparing it with the movie adaptation directed by Martin Scorsese, released in 2010. And Shutter Island won a book versus movie poll I posted on my community page, so if you are not subscribed to my channel, you definitely should, because I do book versus movie polls about every other month or so definitely subscribe so you can take part in my book versus movie content. And then also in September, all of the episodes I did were all subscriber requests, so I definitely want to do a subscriber month again, probably in like February or March I will be doing that. So subscribe to my channel, and then I will post on my community page when I do the subscriber month, and you can submit your request. And yeah, I definitely want to make sure I'm covering content that people are interested in, of course. And so yeah, I enjoy doing these polls and these subscriber months. That was a lot of fun. So yeah, definitely subscribe if you are not already. So getting right into the book review for Shutter Island. I have read this book before. I read it in 2020. I also did a whole book versus movie for this in 2020. This was the 11th episode I ever did back when it was just a podcast. So that's one reason I'm returning to it, is because one, I wanted to reread the book and watch the movie again, but also that was like a very early episode and I feel like I've improved since then. And I also didn't have an actual video for it. So this gives me the chance to create an actual video, because before it was just the audio. Anyway, I've read this book before is what I'm saying. And I enjoyed it that first time, even though my first time reading it, I'd already seen the movie. So I have never read this book not knowing the reveal. So if you read this book before seeing the movie, I would love to know what it was like to read this book not knowing what was going to happen, because I'm sure it was quite the experience. But even though I had read this book before and I already knew everything that was happening, I was very curious to see if that would take away from the reading experience and if I would like it less the second time around. But I am happy to report that I still loved this book. And the fact that it held up so well with a second read made me give it 5 stars. Maybe I was feeling generous, I don't know, but there is just like so many themes and elements going on, so it gives you so much to think about. And then also when you know how it ends, you just notice so many things throughout the story that you have a new appreciation for that I feel like I would have missed had I not known how the book was going to end. And yeah, it's a great thriller, it's a great mystery, and then you also have just great character development. So yeah, I would highly recommend this book if you have not read it, and even if you've seen the movie, even if you know the ending, still give it a shot. I think you will really like it. And then on to the movie review. This was probably like my 4th time seeing the movie, and yeah, I still loved it. And again, there's some movies that have like, a surprise ending. And sometimes when you try to rewatch it, when you know how it ends, you just aren't interested. The same can be said with books, but this movie and this book are not like that. In fact, once you know the ending, watching it a second time is like a whole different experience. So it's one you want to watch a second time so that you can notice things that you hadn't been looking out for the first time around. And this goes for the book too. There is just like so much nuance to so many conversations. And I feel like the first time you watch this movie or read the book, you're just kind of taking it at surface level, which again, the book does have like so many different themes and messages and just things to really think about. So I don't mean surface level as in it's not deep and thought-provoking, because it is, but when you go through it that second, third, 4th time, you just notice all the layers and all the nuance there is. And this is an incredibly faithful adaptation. So I have done 3 Scorsese movies so far. I have done Goodfellas, which again, I just have the audio for that, but you can listen to that one if you want. And then I also recently did Killers of the Flower Moon. And so all 3 of his adaptations have been so faithful to the book. So a lot of his movies are based on books. So I'll have to make my way through his filmography and see if that just tracks with his movies where he does stay close to the book. Because so far, the 3 I've done are very faithful. And this movie did not receive any Oscar nominations, despite it being a Martin Scorsese movie starring Leonardo DiCaprio. But the reason it didn't was because the production company already had 2 movies that they were pushing for award season, The Lovely Bones and Up in the Air. And so they just didn't have the budget to promote another movie for Academy Awards and all, BAFTAs and Golden Globes, whatever. And so they just didn't have the budget for it. So they gave it was originally going to come out in like October or something, but they pushed it to February so that it would miss out on award season. So, and with awards, like, I don't know when I first realized this, but they are so much more political than I used to think. When I was younger and more naive, I was like, oh, they just notice whatever movies are best and whatever, whoever gave great performances and they just, notice them and nominate them and award them. But there is just so much campaigning going on and so much money involved. And you also like submit the movies and the performers you want nominated. So it's not like someone is just like, ooh, he was really good, let's nominate him. Like, no, people submit themselves. The production companies submit the actors and the movies and whatever, and then they have to campaign for it. And so, yeah, a lot more politics going on with awards than you would think, because initially when I saw this wasn't nominated for anything, I was like, oh, it just went under the radar, and like for some reason people just didn't notice it and didn't appreciate it or something. But really it's just because the production company didn't submit it and they purposefully released it in February because they just didn't have the budget to promote it for awards. But anyway, that's my Academy Award tangent. But yeah, before I get into the details of the plot, I highly recommend both book and movie. So if you do not know the ending, like, please do not watch the rest of this video. Go either read the book and or watch the movie, and then you can come and watch my video. But I do not want to spoil this for anyone who does not know. And again, even if you do know, it doesn't ruin the movie or book experience, because like I said, there's so much you can catch the more you read or watch it. But regardless, spoilers ahead. So if you do not want this spoiled for you, do not watch the rest of this video. So the book actually begins with two things that are not in the movie. So for starters, we get a journal entry from Dr. Lester Sheehan in 1993, and he is like reflecting back on a specific event. And then from there, we move to Teddy's childhood, and Teddy Daniels is the main character. So we see when he is a boy, his dad is a sailor, and his dad, the first time he takes Teddy out to sea, they see Shutter Island because they're like, sailing around there. And then Teddy gets very sick and starts throwing up, and his dad like is nice about it. And he keeps telling, once they get home, he keeps telling him like, oh, we'll go back out. But then they never do. And so even though the dad doesn't say anything, Teddy feels that the dad is disappointed in him because the dad is a sailor and that's a huge part of his identity. And so the fact that he can't share that with his son, Teddy just feels like he's disappointed in him. And then shortly after that, his dad ends up dying. And then from there, we go to 1954 and we see an adult Teddy once again at sea and once again sick. And he is with his new partner. He's a U.S. Marshal and he's with his new partner, Chuck. And they're on their way to Shutter Island, which is now home to Ashcliff, a mental institution for the criminally insane, and a patient there, Rachel Solando, has escaped, and so Teddy and this new other U.S. Marshal are sent to investigate. And during their investigation, Teddy confides in Chuck that actually when he heard that Ashcliff was needing U.S. Marshals sent over, Teddy like jumped on the opportunity to be sent over because his wife had died in an apartment fire, and the guy who started the fire was a man named Andrew Ladis, and Teddy found out that Ladis was sent to Ashcliff, and so he wants to go to confront Ladis, I guess, and like avenge his wife in some way. But also before he was sent over, when he found out Ladis was sent to Ashcliff, he started reading about Ashcliff, and he found out that they were doing some like very suspicious experiments and like, messing with hallucinogens and just doing like, this is 1954, and he read that they were doing like Nazi like experiments on humans. And we do see over the course of the story how Teddy is suicidal to some extent because of the death of his wife, and he just loved her so much, and she's been dead now for 2 years, and so he just doesn't see the point of living. But the book reads that he never committed suicide though, because even though he didn't have a good reason to live, he says he also didn't have a good reason to die, because he does not believe in an afterlife. So he doesn't believe that his death will reunite him with Dolores. So he just is in this weird spot emotionally. And we do get flashbacks in book and movie. We get more flashbacks in the book, but we see how his wife was just like mentally unwell. And there is a scene in the book that's not in the movie where she is just like saying things that are just making him very uncomfortable and like just showing him that something is wrong with her, I guess, to some extent. And the book reads, "And he felt like crying, not from the pain, not from the hangover, but because he didn't know what was happening to his wife, to the girl he'd first danced with at the Coconut Grove. He didn't know what she was becoming or what the world was becoming with its legions of tiny, dirty wars and furious hatreds and spies in Washington and Hollywood, gas masks and schoolhouses, cement bomb shelters and basements, and it was somehow all connected. His wife, this world, his drinking, the war he'd fought because he honestly believed it would end all of this." And then to move on to Rachel Solando. So she is the patient that escaped and the one they are investigating her disappearance. And we find out that the reason she was at Ashcliff was because she had killed her 3 children, but then she refused to acknowledge her actions. And so then she started living in a delusion, not realizing what she had done. So that's why she was at Ashcliff. And then while they are like looking into her room in the book, Dr. Colley, he is the head doctor over Ashcliff. He gives Teddy this like paper that has a code that Rachel had written. Whereas in the movie, Teddy finds the code himself. In the movie, the code is just, it says the law of 4, and then it says who is 60 67. And there is more to it in the book. In the book, it's like the law of four, I am 47, they were 80, plus you are four, we are four, but who is 67? And in the book, there are a lot of different clues that Rachel leaves behind that Teddy, like picks up on and uncodes. But in the movie, it is just the law of four and who is 67. And then soon after Teddy and Chuck get there, of course, he's having them all like search the island to see where Rachel could be hiding. And he notices that like the orderlies and the wardens are all just very half-hearted in their search. And then they're also, when he's asking questions and wanting records, they're just not being helpful at all. And he's like, what the heck? Like, you asked us over here to investigate this, and now you're just making it incredibly difficult. And then in general, like when he's talking to the staff, like doing a group interview, or when he's meeting with patients, which the patients are off, but they're also, mental patients. But yeah, the staff just doesn't seem too worried. And they almost seem like annoyed that they're there having to be questioned. And there is a part in the book and movie where they were saying that there had been a group therapy meeting the night before and Rachel had been there. And so he asks the nurse, like, did anything unusual happen in that group therapy meeting? And then the nurse says, define unusual. This is a mental institution, Marshall, for the criminally insane. Usual isn't a big part of our day. And then like the next day or something, Rachel is found. Someone else finds her, they bring her in. And so the investigation is over. However, Chuck and Teddy cannot leave because there is a hurricane and no ferries can come to the island. So they are just stuck there. And so you have this hurricane happening where it's like raining an insane amount, of course. And Teddy and Chuck, their clothes are soaked. So then they turn in their clothes and are given orderly uniforms instead. And then the day after the hurricane, there's just like so much damage that has been done and electrical fences that are no longer working and patients have escaped. And so it's just kind of chaos. And Chuck and Teddy decide to take advantage of this chaos. And since they're dressed as orderlies, because there's Ward A and Ward B, which is just for like the normal level people. But then Ward C is for like the most serious, violent people, the most dangerous people. And so Teddy, again, he thinks something is up with Ashcliff and there's shady things going on. And he also wants to find Andrew Latis, and no one is saying they know who Andrew Latis is, but he's like, I know he's here. And so they take advantage of all this chaos and they're like, we're going to go check out Ward C. And so while they're there, Chuck and Teddy end up getting separated. And while Teddy is walking around, he runs into a guy named George Noyce. And he had known George Noyce because, again, back when he was researching Ashcliff, he heard about George Noyce and how he had been sent to Ashcliff, but then he was released. And then he like did something else again and he was tried. And he, when he was put on trial, he was begging like, please give me the death sentence, anything, I don't care, just do not send me back to Ashcliff. And so he was sent to a different prison. And while he was in this prison, Teddy had gone to go talk to him to figure out, like what was so weird about Ashcliff, basically. And so Teddy is very surprised to see him here because he's like, wait, what? Like you were sent back? But I saw you at that other prison. And George Noyce, like he's all beaten up and he's talking about Andrew Latis in this conversation. And he's making it seem like there's a big conspiracy. And he's like, it's all about you and Latis. And, like you need to uncover the truth and you need to let Dolores go. But he says he can't let Dolores go. And then George Noyce also makes him suspicious of Chuck because he's like, have you been left alone at all while you've been here? And he's like, well, I've been with my partner. And he's like, is your partner someone you even know or did you just meet him? And he's like, well, yeah, I just met him for this investigation. And so now Teddy is just feeling very on edge and skeptical and nervous about everyone, including Chuck, this person he has been trusting the whole time. And so then once again, Teddy and Chuck are like reunited and they leave Ward C. And then Teddy sees like some rocks he wants to investigate. But Chuck, in the book, Chuck is like, I don't want to go down there. Like that's a lot of work. I'll just stay up here. Whereas in the movie, Teddy tells Chuck, like, you stay here. Like I want some space, basically. But in both, Teddy goes down there. And then when he comes back up, Chuck is nowhere to be found. But while all of this is going on, he sees light in a cave and he goes in and he sees the real Rachel Solando. So that Rachel Solando that was found, that was, a fake, someone pretending to be Rachel. And now he sees the real Rachel in a cave and she was not a mental patient. Instead, she had been a doctor there. But when she like knew the weird experiments and things that were going on, but then when she didn't go along with what they were doing, they tried to find a way to get rid of her and convince people that she had gone insane. But she was able to escape. However, she cannot get off the island. So she just kind of moves from place to place at night and has just been hiding out on the island. And while he talks to her, she confirms his suspicions about like all of the weird, disturbing things that are going on. And she also tells him, like he says, like, oh, I came here with a friend named Chuck. Like, have you seen him? And she's like, you don't have any friends and you're never getting off this island. And yeah, and from there, he then goes back into like the main building and he sees Dr. Colley and he's like, oh, like, have you seen my partner, Chuck? And Dr. Colley says, who's Chuck? Like, you don't have a partner. You came here alone. And so at this point, Teddy, he thinks that one, because at first when you're reading this, you're like, oh my gosh, like he's crazy. There is no Chuck. But actually he thinks that there is a Chuck. He's not crazy. And that they have kidnapped Chuck and are experimenting on him. And there is this lighthouse that they have been weird about. And they're like, oh, it's like a sewage processing plant. But he's like, no, there's something weird going on in that lighthouse. That's where they are doing these experiments. And that is where they have Chuck. And they are going to experiment on him. So I need to go save him. So Teddy makes his way to the lighthouse. And when he bursts in, he sees Dr. Colley sitting at a desk. And there is a line that is repeated in both book and movie when Teddy has flashbacks regarding his dead wife. She is often soaking wet. And so he's often saying like, why are you all wet, baby? And so then when he bursts in this room in book and movie, Dr. Colley says, why are you all wet, baby? And then from there, Dr. Colley reveals to Teddy that Teddy is Andrew Laeddis. So Andrew Laeddis, like I said, had been the guy that Teddy wanted to confront because he's responsible for the death of Dolores. And also it's really interesting because Andrew Laeddis, he says, is just like someone really ugly and just has a really memorable, disturbing look. And it makes so much sense because he actually is Andrew Laeddis, but he's kind of like disassociated himself. And so that side of him, the Andrew Laeddis side of him, he perceives as someone like ugly and disturbing because that's the side of him that he can't bear to accept and take responsibility for, you know? But anyway, he has been at Ashcliff for 2 years. We find out he is a patient there, and he has been living in a delusion where he is a U.S. Marshal investigating the disappearance of Rachel Solando. And so his whole time there, he has been living this delusion. And so Dr. Colley, he was hoping that he would have a breakthrough and realize he is Andrew Laeddis if they put on this whole play for them. So he had the whole hospital, the whole island, go along with Teddy's delusion in hopes that playing it out would lead to Teddy having a breakthrough, which his name isn't Teddy, his name is Andrew, but just to keep things uncomplicated, I'm going to call him Teddy, but really he is Andrew Laeddis. But yeah, the reason he is living in a delusion is because his wife had mental health issues, which he ignored. His children expressed like, oh, like their discomfort with the mom and how like she was weird and like it made them uncomfortable. But again, he just kept dismissing it. He would work a lot, he drank a lot, and he ignored all the signs, and he didn't want to admit there was something wrong with his wife. And then one day he comes home and he sees that she has killed their 3 children. And then she's also, as they're talking after he realizes what she has done, she is saying that like she basically wants peace, kind of. She doesn't phrase it like that, but I can't remember exactly what she says. But yeah, so then he ends up shooting her, and he still loved her even after what she did. Like he still loved her, but at the same time, like he hated what she had done, of course. And so he shoots her, and he just can't bear to accept any of that. And so that is why he started living in a delusion. And in his delusion, he and Dolores didn't even have kids. And then yeah, he took on a new name, and Andrew Laeddis became like this villain that he was trying to track down and find. And Rachel Solando, in his delusion, she was at Ashcliff for having done kind of a mix because she killed her kids like Dolores, but then she was living in a delusion because of it, which is what Teddy was doing. And then Chuck is Dr. Sheehan. We have been hearing about Dr. Sheehan and how he has left the island and he is on vacation or something. And Teddy and Chuck are like, this is really weird. Like a patient goes missing and you let a doctor still leave on his vacation. Like that's super fishy. But we find out that Chuck is Dr. Sheehan, and he has been Teddy's primary psychologist. And so that is why he took on the role of being being Teddy's partner. But in both book and movie, Sheehan shows up. And so he and Colley are trying to convince Teddy that what they are saying is true. And they're also trying to convince him at like how important it is that he accepts the truth. And Dr. Sheehan says to him, listen to me. If we fail here, we've lost. Not just with you. Right now, the balance of power is in the hands of the surgeons, but that's going to change fast. The pharmacists will take over, and it won't be any less barbaric. It'll just seem so. The same zombification and warehousing that are going on now will continue under a more publicly palatable veneer. Here in this place, it comes down to you, Andrew. And so yeah, the medical industry is just on this brink. Like lobotomies and electroshock were more of a thing, but he's saying how pretty soon it's going to shift. People are just going to be like prescribing pills, and everybody's just going to be zombified, but it won't be from lobotomies. It'll be from being on all these medications essentially. And so Sheehan and Dr. Colley feel like you can help patients without surgeries and without medications. In some cases, they do give Teddy some medications because he is like such a violent, dangerous person. But anyway, they're like, we believe that if you just talk to people and just try to help them and see the humanity in them, like we believe that can cure people. And so that's what we're trying to prove with you, Teddy. So you need to accept the truth. And if he doesn't accept the truth, then, their board of overseers will just have Teddy lobotomized, which is is what they want to do anyway. But Dr. Colley and Dr. Sheehan are just like, no, like, let us try this huge play act we're going to put on, and we think it'll work, and then he won't need to get that surgery done. And ultimately in both, he does accept the truth, and he realizes that he is Andrew Laeddis, and he realizes everything that has happened. However, in both book and movie, the next day, they're outside, and Chuck walks up to Teddy, and he's like, oh, like, so what you thinking for today? Just trying to see if it has stuck, because they tell Teddy like 9 months ago, you had a breakthrough and realized the truth, but then you just regressed and reverted back to your old delusion. And so they're seeing if it actually stuck this time. And so when Chuck walks up to him and he's like, oh, so what are the plans for the day? Teddy replies as if he is still a U.S. Marshal. And so Chuck, Dr. Sheehan, gives the look to Dr. Colley and the others being like, it didn't work, it didn't stick, and he has gone back to being Teddy. And the book ends with this, where we see that Teddy is going to have to get a lobotomy and that it did not stick. Whereas in the movie, there is a final line where after he replies being like, acting like he's still a U.S. Marshal, Teddy then turns to Chuck and he's like, this place makes me wonder, which would be worse? To live as a monster or to die a good man? And this seems pretty obvious to me that the movie is taking the stance that Teddy, he still realizes the truth. However, it is still just like too much for him to bear. So he's like, yeah, like logically, like I know that I'm Andrew Laeddis and I know what I did and I know what Dolores did, but I still don't want to accept it. So I would rather get a lobotomy and potentially die than have to live taking on the responsibility of that truth. Whereas the book is kind of up to the reader to decide. But to talk about Teddy's delusion, so once you realize this, there are so many lines, so many camera angles, like so many conversations that just take on a whole new meaning. And also you might think like, oh, like once you know that the Rachel Solando investigation is like not an investigation, you might think like, oh, well then the story will be boring because all of this investigation stuff is happening, but it means nothing because it's all fake. But that is actually not true, because so much of the investigation reflects back on Teddy and who he is and what they are trying to do to help him. And so even though you're no longer curious to see what's happening with Rachel Solando, which the Rachel in the cave, that was a delusion. That was an imaginary conversation he was having. But anyway, so even though you know that Rachel Solando isn't a real person, I was still just as interested in what was in the events that were happening in the investigation, because it all just reflected back on Teddy. And there is a part early on in the book when Teddy, he is with his wife, and she starts like reflecting back to when they first met. And then the book reads, Teddy hated when she did this. Memory lane. She couldn't adapt to the present, to who they are now, warts and all, and so she drove winding lanes into the past to warm herself. Which obviously, once you read this knowing the truth, that is reflective of Teddy, because that is what he's doing. He can't accept the truth, warts and all, so he doesn't accept it. And he doesn't go down memory lane per se, but he just doesn't live with the truth. And then there's another conversation that he has with Chuck about World War II. This line from Chuck, I think, was Chuck trying to like get Teddy to realize the truth. And then Teddy's reply is obviously very applicable as well to what really happened with him and Dolores. But the book reads, this is Chuck talking. My parents, my girlfriend, some of my friends who couldn't pass the physical, they all ask, what was it like? That's what they want to know. And you want to say, I don't know what it was like. It happened to someone else. I was just watching it all from above or something. He held out his hands. I can't explain it any better. Did that make any sense? Teddy then responds, you can't tell them. They'll never understand. Because what you did was for the right reason, but what you did was also wrong, and you'll never wash it off. And then some things with the movie, like whenever Dr. Sheehan is mentioned, the camera often pans to Chuck. Obviously, when you watch it knowing he is Dr. Sheehan, it makes sense that we're seeing him. And then there's a part where they are questioning a patient, and there's a part where she gets a glass of water and drinks it. And when we see the shot from Teddy's perspective, she's just holding up an empty hand with no glass. But then from a different perspective, we see she did have a cup. And then there's another part where he thinks he sees Chuck's dead body falling off the cliff, but then he goes down there and he sees it was just a rock that looked like a body, basically. So these different moments, like with Chuck's dead body and the cup, where we just see that Teddy isn't necessarily a reliable narrator because he's not seeing things clearly. And then also in book and movie, the dialogue between Chuck and Teddy can be pretty cheesy at times. And there's even a point in the book when Teddy is thinking, like, I feel like we're in a James Cagney novel with the way we're talking. But once you know that this investigation is fake and Chuck isn't even a real U.S. Marshal, it makes sense that the dialogue, the way they talk is like so cheesy and cliche because none of it is real anyway. And then also like his conversation with George Noyes takes takes on a whole new meaning when you know the truth. And then we also have Chuck fumbling with the gun at the beginning. They have to like return their firearms, and Chuck is like fumbling with his gun, which seems off in the moment. But again, you don't really pay too much attention to it until after the fact. You realize he was fumbling because he's not used to having a gun holster. And then all of the strange interactions he has with people and talking to the staff. And you have the woman who says, you know, I work at a mental institution. Usual isn't a big part of our day. And that gets a laugh from the other staff when she says it. And that line takes on a whole new meaning because it's like, I'm sitting here being interviewed by a patient who thinks he's a US Marshal, asking questions about someone who doesn't exist. Yeah, usual isn't a big part of our day. And then something else that's mentioned in the book. So Chuck is the name that Teddy created for this fake US Marshal partner he has. But then in the book, and his last name is All. And in the book, Collie is saying, Chuck All. I mean, Jesus, say it a couple of times fast. It's just another one of your jokes, Andrew. But I was trying to understand that. I was like, wait, Chuck All? Like say it a couple times fast? Chuck All, Chuck All, Chuck All? I still don't get like what it's meaning. Like, is it supposed to sound like check all? Like, cause I don't know. I don't know what secret meaning Chuck All, the name, is supposed to have. That one's just going right over my head. So if you know what was implied, then please comment down below and enlighten me. And then the conversation he has with his warden, again, takes on new meaning, but the conversations are different from book to movie. And in the movie, he's talking about violence and how like nature is violent and how he says how he and Teddy are men of violence. And he's just like being very weird and threatening and like in a weird off-putting way. Whereas in the book, their conversation, he's talking about like visiting the South, and he keeps using the N-word, but he's saying how like being an N-word has nothing to do with color. It's like something else. And he says Teddy is the N-word. And it was just a weird conversation in the book. So I definitely prefer the movie conversation he has with the warden instead. And then, yeah, in the book, like I said, Rachel leaves all of these clues for Teddy, but you realize like Teddy was leaving these clues for himself. But also I think sometimes he was seeing clues that didn't even exist. Like there's a part where he sees rocks and it's like, oh, they're stacked up in a certain way. It means something. But then thinking back, it's like, was he just seeing a clue that wasn't even there? He just made it up himself. And with the movie, like once this is all revealed, I feel like some movies we would get this flashback of different scenes, the director telling us like, yeah, these were the clues that you didn't notice. Shutter Island does not do that. And I love that Scorsese didn't go back and show us everything. Instead, it's us to either remember or it's on us to watch the movie again and then see all the different clues, you know? And I just like when directors and writers don't spoon feed us things either. So I like that he wasn't like, oh, in case the audience is stupid, here you go. Like, no, I want a director and a writer who trusts that the audience isn't a bunch of idiots, you know? And also when Teddy shows up, he makes a comment to Dr. Colley because Dr. Colley says how he feels like you can get through a patient by just like talking to them. And Teddy says something about like, well, you know, these patients all committed crimes, like they're killers, like what about their victims? And Dr. Colley, he's like, you know, my job doesn't relate to the victims. My job is these people right here. And Teddy basically insinuates that he thinks Colley is being too nice and that maybe these people don't deserve to be treated as well as Dr. Colley treats them. And this makes sense that he has that view of them because he himself, the Andrew latest side of him, he cannot forgive himself for what he has done. So how can he forgive other people when he can't even forgive himself? And he can't forgive himself for killing Dolores, but the even bigger thing, he can't forgive himself for allowing their kids to be killed to begin with and for ignoring all of the signs. And in the book, we get more details into their past and how like there really were a lot of signs that he left out. But in the book it reads, but he'd failed her, failed his children, failed the lives they'd all built together because he'd refused to see Dolores, really see her, see that her insanity was not her fault, not something she could control, not some proof of moral weakness or lack of fortitude. He'd refused to see it because if she actually were his true love, his immortal other self, then what did that say about his brain, his sanity, his moral weakness? And so I just thought that was so fascinating how he wanted to be in denial because it would reflect back on him. Because what kind of a person wants to be with someone like that, right? That was his thinking. So yeah, I just thought that was so interesting. And like I said, in the book, when he has this realization of the truth, we get so many more details, like conversations he has with the kids that show something is weird, but he just dismissed it, and how he drank a lot. But in the movie, even though we don't get as many details, we do get a fantastic scene when Teddy is sitting on the edge of his bed and they are asking him like, what's your name? Why are you here? And he's having to answer. And at this point, he's had his breakthrough. So he's saying like, my name is Andrew Latis. I'm here because I killed my wife and I killed her because she had killed our 3 kids. And so he's just, you know, confirming that he has accepted the truth now. But it is an amazing scene, and it might be my favorite part in the whole movie because DiCaprio's acting is excellent. So even though we don't get as many flashbacks, that scene is just so well done. And yeah, I think it's my favorite in the whole movie. It was so good and so powerful and sad and tragic and moving, and yeah, just so much is conveyed in that scene. But I did want to talk about Teddy in World War II because his time as a soldier in Germany is a big part of his identity. His character had been at Dachau, which was a Nazi death camp, and he was there, you know, he like saved the prisoners and they had killed the guards. And so the US soldiers, the Nazi guards had surrendered, but then when the soldiers just like saw what they had been doing to the prisoners, the American soldiers just gunned down all of the guards, even though they were not armed. And so he says how like, you know, it wasn't war. They weren't like trying to fight us. It was murder. We just murdered all of them. And so this is a big part of his identity. And in the movie, Dr. Colley tells him, he's like, you did fight in World War II, you were at Dachau, but you may not have even killed anybody. So all of that might be part of Teddy's delusion. But this isn't the case in the book. I think in the book, he definitely had killed all of those soldiers, because there's a part where after he is realizing the truth, when he sees what Dolores has done, it reads, after the war, after Dachau, he swore he would never kill again unless he had no choice, unless the other man's gun was already pointed at him. Only then. He couldn't take one more death. He couldn't. And so I think this is a big part, you know, specific to the book, because the movie makes it seem like it might not even be true. But in the book, this is a big reason as to why it just was too much for him to take. Like he'd experienced so much death and violence and killing, and it was too much. And then to kill someone he loved so much. And he says how even after what she has done, he says that he still loves her more than his two sons. His daughter, you know, he loved his daughter a lot too. So his daughter, it's harder to say, but his wife is still like the person he loves most in the world. But he can't bear to let her live. And then real quick, I know that again, this has been a longer video, but I did also want to talk about the time period because this takes place in 1954. And I think there's so many reasons why it was like specific at this time. You know, you have the medical aspect, like I talked about, where the medical industry was on this cusp because lobotomies in the 50s, those started to become less and less popular. And then by the 60s, they were happening very rarely. And the last one ever was performed in 1967. So that was beginning to decline, while pharmaceuticals were beginning to increase in the 50s. And then World War II obviously had recently ended. And so just the effect that had on Teddy as someone who was there fighting in the war, but also like the fact that, you know, what the Nazis were doing to the people that they had imprisoned, like the inhumane, barbaric experiments they were doing, obviously that like deeply affected him because it was part of his delusion. You had the Korean War as well. That's mentioned how the Korean War started up. And then you have, you know, the atomic bombs and the hydrogen bombs, which were new and caused a new sense of fear and paranoia in people. And when Teddy is in Ward C, there is this other patient that shows up and he's talking about the hydrogen bomb to Teddy. And this is in both book and movie, but I wanted to share a quote from the book, which reads, "It falls in on itself and goes through a series of internal breakdowns, collapsing and collapsing. But all that collapsing, it creates mass and density. See, the fury of its own self-destruction creates an entirely new monster." And this clearly seems to symbolize what is happening to Teddy, right? Like his lack of acceptance is causing his own like implosion to happen inside of him. And his own implosion is like an explosion affecting all of those around him. And that line, the self-destruction creates an entirely new monster, is obviously, you know, very similar to the final line in the movie where he talks about living as a monster, you know? But yeah, and then you also have hallucinogenics, which are talked about in the book and movie, how like, you know, Ashcliffe is experimenting with hallucinogens, LSD and all that stuff. That was also very new and like scary at the time. And so yeah, I think the time period of this story is such a key aspect to all of this. And then just to talk really quick about some of the changes from book to movie, like I said, the movie is incredibly faithful, so the changes are pretty minor. You know, we have the ones I mentioned, like the journal entry from Lester Sheehan. You have Teddy's childhood and his dad who was a sailor. We also get more flashbacks in the book as well. The conversation with the warden is different. And then Teddy and Chuck are bunking with some of the other orderlies, and in the book we get more scenes where they are talking with these orderlies, which it is kind of important because he sees how Chuck has such an ease around people and he's so likable and he's so comfortable around them, and Teddy is very envious. But when you realize it's because Dr. Sheehan is a doctor and he knows all of these people, that's why he has such ease around them, is because he's been working with them for so long. And then also an interesting thing in the book, so the lady who pretended to be Rachel Solando, we find out that she was a nurse at Ashcliffe who they had dress up as Rachel Solando. And we find out in the book that Dr. Sheehan and that nurse end up getting married. She is who he is with when we see that 1993 journal entry. movie. So that's kind of a fun fact about the book. But also another change is that in the movie, when they are trying to convince Teddy that he is Andrew Latis, they show him pictures of his dead children, and it is when he sees these pictures that he realizes the truth. And they changed the name of his children. So in the movie, his daughter's name is Rachel in both book and movie. But then in the movie, the sons' names are Simon and Henry, whereas in the book, his sons' names had been Edward and Daniel. And Teddy, his full name is Edward Daniels. And so obviously he chose that name because it was the name of his sons. So I don't know why the movie made that change. It seems like a pointless change in my mind. But anyway, when he sees the pictures of his dead children is when he realizes the truth. Whereas in the book, even when he sees his dead children, he still refuses to acknowledge it. And it is not until he goes to bed that then he has his dream flashback, where he remembers everything and he wakes up realizing the truth. But when it comes to book versus movie, this is so difficult because what makes the movie great, it has a fantastic script, of course, and just the book is also just written in such a cinematic way. And so there are so many details from the book that are in the movie. And initially it seems like, oh, that's like a movie thing to add that detail. But no, so many little details are straight from the book. And then the dialogue is verbatim. And then the plot itself is just so true to the book. So it seems right there that I should say the book wins because a large part of what makes the movie great comes right from the book. However, also a large part of what makes the movie great are the performances and the cinematography and the direction and, it's all of that, the production, so that is a huge part. So yeah, it's tough. And also the script writer just knowing when they were adapting this book, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Another script writer maybe would have made too many changes, right? And they could have ruined it potentially. But so the script writer knew what they were doing. And then of course, Martin Scorsese knew what he was doing. And then you get amazing performances, Mark Ruffalo, Leonardo DiCaprio, Ben Kingsley. So yeah, this is the logical side of me wants to say the book because I gave the book 5 stars, which again, I don't think that was generous. I actually think it is a 5-star book. Whereas the movie I gave 4 stars. So maybe I just have a higher bar for movies, but logically based on that, I should say the book wins if I gave it a higher star rating. But there's another part of me that still wants to say the movie, and neither of them made me cry, but both book and movie, I had, a bit of moisture in my eyes near the end. But both of them made me emotional. And so yeah, it's just so hard to choose. I kind of want to say the movie wins, but when I say that, it's almost random because I could say either one and it would be accurate because they're both so good. I don't let myself do ties though, so I'm just going to say the movie, but ultimately they're both fantastic. So I highly recommend them each. And yeah, I guess that wraps it up for Shutter Island. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for everybody who voted in that poll that I posted. I will do another one come December, so definitely subscribe so you can take part. Like this video, comment your thoughts down below. Let me know what it was like to see this movie for the first time. Let me know what it was like if you read this book without knowing the reveal. I'm curious what your reading experience was. So yeah, let me know all the thoughts down below in the comments. And if you want more Martin Scorsese content, like I said, I have covered Goodfellas. It is just the audio, but I do have that. And then I also recently did Killers of the Flower Moon. And then as far as DiCaprio goes, I've covered a lot of Leonardo DiCaprio. So you got a lot to choose from, but I will link to Catch Me If You Can, which is a recent DiCaprio one I did, which was also one that I've done before and I redid it. But anyway, Catch Me If You Can is a fantastic movie, Steven Spielberg. So I will link to that in case you want more Leonardo DiCaprio content. So thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time. Bye.